Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to today's CAFETA webinar. We're coming to you live on November 7th. For those who don't know, CAFETA means learning in Creek. Today, you're going to be learning how to use a logic model to increase your grant-seeking success. This presentation is by Diane Leonard. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're so thrilled that all of you could join us for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. So just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Here on our new system, the virtual class is what the webinar is called, and courses are going to hold all the webinar information after the fact. So if you ever need to go look up a PDF of slides of a webinar you missed, or maybe it's recording, you can find all of that information in the courses section where that yellow circle is. When you are coming on to join a live webinar, you can log into the system and then you'll be able to click on a big green banner at the top of the screen, just like you see here. So as long as you are joining while a webinar is live and happening, you will be able to join in. We ask that when you join, you select the listen only option so that we can cut out on any kind of audio feedback. And then if you do join and you realize that your sound isn't coming from the place that you would prefer that it come out, if you click on that little phone icon, it'll give you a list of your microphone and your speaker devices, and you can go ahead and select the one that you would prefer the output to be. Some ways that you can interact during today's webinar. We do have the public chat available. If you want to join in, you can just type the message you want to say and then hit enter, or you can click on the little paper airplane icon. We also have a section that is shared notes. Both in the shared notes section and the public chat, I've included links for today's webinar feedback survey, a copy of the presentation slides. Diane has included a resource item, a logic model guide. The link to download that is available, as well as one to register for our weekly newsletter so that you can always know when our webinars are happening, and a link to save in your bookmarks so that you can log on to the system easier. Our webinar archive moved to YouTube, so I've put that link for you in the chat as well, and then the link to our LinkedIn. If you're using the chat to ask a question and you feel like maybe we missed it, you could use that raise your hand feature that's all the way off to the right. And then something fun you can do on this platform is to set a status during webinars. So all you have to do is click on your name in the users list, and then it'll bring up a list of either to mute yourself or to set a status. You'd click on set status, and then you can signal that you've stepped away, raise your hand, that you're undecided, confused, sad, happy, show applause, give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So that's something you can do. And then just a final note, if you do click on that red menu panel, know that it's going to pull you out of the actual webinar itself. You'll go back to a screen where you can see that live banner across the top of the screen, the green one, and you can easily just click on that and rejoin. But just know that if you do click on that menu panel, it will pull you from the webinar and you'll have to just kind of come back in. But go ahead, let's get the chat going together. So if you open up the public chat, go ahead and let us know your name, where you're joining us from, tribal affiliation, the work or the role that you have in Indian country professionally. And while y'all are getting the chat box going, it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Diane Leonard. And Diane, I am giving you the presenter status now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Brooke. Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be with you today. We are going to be talking about the logic model, which, I get it, it's a formal program design title for what we're going to talk about today. I love the phrase blueprint as well. If you prefer, happy to have that be how you think about this idea of a logic model. And I recognize some names. Good to see you again. But I don't recognize all the names. And so I want to take a moment and introduce myself and actually give you kind of a fun update because the bio slide's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is actually related to today's topic. So, hi, I'm Diane, and I love all things grants. In particular, I like taking the stress out of grants for you and your colleagues. And logic models, today's topic, can be a bit stressful for folks. The reason the bio slide is out of date is because we found out about a large federal award today, 3.18 million and change over 5 years. So yes, that item on the screen, incorrect, a little short. But the reason that award was successful, well, in addition to the amazing work that that organization is doing, is because before they drafted anything for their federal application, they agreed on their program design elements using, you guessed it, a logic model. So a really timely example of how important today's topic can be to help make your applications incredibly successful and competitive. Now, good news, the other item I always like to point out, running. Yes, I'm a runner for self-care to rejuvenate myself for this grant writing work. It's a beautiful, crisp, unseasonably warm, though, fall day in far, far upstate New York. So check the box. Did that, ran to the St. Lawrence River and back. And I did have that one really good cup of coffee. I've been hydrating with water since. So I am fueled, hydrated, and ready to go. Now, as we're getting started, I know that often I will ask you a prompt in the chat box. I'm going to mix it up. I still am going to ask you a prompt in your chat, but I'm asking you something different than in the past. If you could please, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, just learning about logic models today, 10, I love logic models, love them. Diane, don't pass me the mic, but I love them. If you could let me know your comfort level with logic models in the chat. There is no judgment on your answer. I just want to get a sense of how folks feel as we get started today. Oh, all right. We've got a lot of first-time learners about logic models. I'm so excited. Okay, so we're going to make it, well, to go from 1 to 10 in 90 minutes, that's a lot of pressure, but I'm hoping you're going to feel far more confident about what is this thing called a logic model and how can I use it for all of my grant applications to help make us more competitive. That is our focus together today. Now, yes, I have a Q&A at the end, but where you just typed your comfort level into the chat, please feel free to ask me questions at any time right in the moment. I really don't want you to keep your questions in a parking lot. So where we're going to begin is what it means to use a logic model. Very contemplative look. Individual on the screen might also be feeling like a 1. What is this logic model thing and how can it help me? To give us a lighter start to the conversation, at its most simple level, wouldn't it be nice if what we said to a grant maker was, listen, if you can just give us all the funds, we'll do the good work. Thumbs up, everybody wins. That would be delightful. What we are doing with a logic model, what we're actually doing is helping our grant makers to understand what it is that we want to do. It's a quick way to visualize what our program design is. So we're going to start by talking about what a logic model is. We're going to think about the 2 different types. I'm going to think about and show you the flow of logic models and talk about how we can use them in our applications. And then you are going to start to build your own. So as we're going through this first section, if you don't already have something to write on or a document open that you could type into, we will need that in just a few minutes because we're going to walk you through building logic models today. So what is a logic model? It is a graphical way that you can present your program information. It is not a lot of narrative. Nope. Blueprint, outlines, high-level information. It is a way that is both brief and visual that helps you to convey what is it you are going to do for your project. What is it you're going to do for your program? Think about it as an overview. It's not all of the details. Far from it. It's an overview, higher level about what your program or your project might create in terms of some outcomes that it'll achieve and some impact that might be the result. Now, on the flip side, this is what a logic model is not. It is not the detailed what. Well, this is the task that will happen at this time. That is not a logic model. We're not looking at a sequential timeline by date for the entire grant award period of all the things and when they will happen. That is not a logic model. In fact, that sounds an awful lot more like a work plan. Also important, but not what we're talking about today. So there are two types of logic models. Now, knowing that most of you, if not all of you here, are learning about logic models for the first time, no pressure at all. I won't also ask you a quiz, like I won't do a pop quiz later. I won't make you repeat these later. But there are two different types of logic model. The first is called a theory of change. A theory of change is how your organization believes it's going to create impact. When we think about a theory of change, we're at like a 30,000 foot overview, really high off the ground for how high level that general representation is. We're going to talk about this, show you some examples, and you're going to write your own in a little bit. The second type of logic model is called a program logic model. This is giving us more like a 10,000 foot overview. High level, how? How are we going to create this impact? What are the resources we would need? What are some of those high level planned activities we might do? What are some outputs we might count? Some outcomes we would expect over time? High level, 10,000 foot overview. You might say, Diane, when do we put our feet on the ground? That's like the task list of the when we will do things that is more like a work plan. Easy peasy, right? No, I get it. That's a lot to take in. We're going to build both of these together. Both your 30,000 foot overview, your theory of change, and your 10,000 foot programmatic logic model. On the screen, I have a quick reference chart. It comes from, let me grab the book on the shelf. Where is it? Here it is. This book, the Logic Model Guidebook, it's a nice skinny little book. This book, the Logic Model Guidebook, is a fantastic follow-up resource if you love to have a book as a reference after today. In your course material is our logic model download from our team. It's great, but it's even thinner than that. It's a small PDF. This is a next level resource here, this book, but this is where this chart comes from. If someone handed you a document and they said, this is my logic model, this helps you to decide which kind am I reading? Theory of change, 30,000 foot, program logic model, 10,000 foot. As I said, we're going to read both. When we think about what a logic model looks like, it looks like flow. It looks like information that is flowing from one side left to right, or flowing from the bottom to the top, or from the top to the bottom. In fact, I have seen it flow from the right to the left. But it's the natural flow of our understanding, building upon what we have just learned from the first part of the document into the next. So a logic model often is visualized using arrows, sort of like the one on the screen now. Different funders, different logic model templates. We're going to work in a very basic template together that you'll be able to translate into any form a grant maker gives you, whether it is private philanthropy, city, state, federal. You will be able to use the template. And the template, you will see it on the screen. It is also, Brooke, thanks so much for putting that chat link there for us. The logic model guide, that's the link to it in your courses. So how are we going to use this logic model? We're going to use it to help plan out our details. If we have a logic model in hand, I find that makes writing our grant application much faster. I won't say easy, that's not a word that goes with grants, but it will make it go faster. We'll have fewer questions for our awesome colleagues because this is an agreed upon program design that we can write from. We can also use it as a way to ensure that all of our program staff or all of our collaborative partners or our program staff, our senior leaders, and our board or advisory council are all on the same page. This is the high-level outline of how we will achieve our impact, how we will implement our program. The reason that you, as a grant-seeking organization, would like to have a logic model is that it helps to give the most concise and compelling definition and overview of your program. You also get a lot of benefit by having one agreed upon place that creates shared understanding between you and your colleagues. It's not telling you like exactly the way that you are going to implement the program. It's not telling you which module on which day and which partner on which day and at what. It's not that level of detail, but it's giving us shared understanding of the guardrails, those higher level details for what this will look like when we go to implement. You might say now, but these grant makers, why are they asking us for a logic model? Why does that help them? Well, the benefit to a grant maker is that it is a visual representation of all the other narrative you are providing them. There are countless questions that they will ask you. Please describe for us the key activities that you will undertake during the grant award period. Please tell us about what outcomes you expect to achieve. Please tell us about the long-term impact you expect to see as a result of this funding. Please tell us what resources you need in order to implement your program. Those are all questions that are drawn right off of a logic model. And so the grant maker might ask you to write responses to those questions, and they will read them when they are reviewing your work. But some grant makers will also ask for this visual representation of those responses, which is your one-page logic model. And the reason is that it gives them a really quick reference to try and digest and learn and understand about your complex program design. Did you know that your work is incredibly complex? How many of you knew that? Want to show me in the chat box? Why for yes and for no? How many of you already knew that your work is already complex? And by your work, I mean the work of your organization in terms of programs, projects, and service delivery. Incredibly complex. Oh, good. Some of you already knew that. The reason I make that point is that your work is complex, but you and your colleagues, you're used to it. It's your work, your programs, your projects, your service. To a grant maker learning about it for the first time, the complexity can be overwhelming for how do they understand and how do they pick your complex work versus this other applicant's complex work. The logic model is a nice visual representation of your main design that can be easier for some grant reviewers to digest and understand. Gives them some things to compare. Different adults learn in different ways. There's a lot of reasons that that benefits grant makers in their review process. What we want to focus on is how we can use logic models to increase your overall success with grant seeking. So to do that, I want to help you build both a theory of change and a logic model. We're going to start with the theory of change. The theory of change is that 30,000 foot, looks like I'm using an umbrella, but I'm trying to indicate here on the screen, the 30,000 foot view of our work. Very, very high level. The type of high level that we're talking about, well, we'll describe it in a moment, it's helping to make high-level connections. If we do this, we get what? So this cartoon is about theory of change. And it's saying, it's like a funder or a donor saying, "Dear Mr. Gandhi, we regret we cannot fund your proposal because the link between spinning cloth," so what we do, "and the fall of the British Empire, was not clear." So that high-level 30,000-foot theory of change is the joke that's been put here into cartoon form. We want your reviewers to understand, we believe if we do this, we get this impact. We get these results. Now, there are two types of theory of change that we'll be looking at. And so I'm going to help you learn to write. It takes us 3 steps to write a theory of change. The way that grant makers talk about theories of change, this is a really big formal definition on the screen. I wouldn't worry about what the formal definition is, but I do want to point out this one part of the definition. What needs to happen in order for a desired outcome to occur? Before I go any further in my explanation, how many of you feel like you could articulate your organization's theory of change? Why for yes and for no? How many of you think you could articulate? I won't put you on the spot. Don't worry, you don't have to unmute and tell me if you don't want to. But how many of you think that you could articulate your organization's theory of change? What I have on the screen is the visual representation of theory of change. Okay, so some of you could, some of you possibly could, not all. So let's think about what it would sound like. If you are a basic theory of change, and I don't mean this in the teenage basic sort of way, like this is absolutely a fine theory of change to have. It's basic because there is one strategy to our get, to our result. And so it is, if we do this one thing, we think we'll see this impact. There is also then a possibility, many organizations in fact will say, we believe if we do these few things, we will get this result or these results, plural. So as you're thinking about what we're going to build together, I'm going to give you the opportunity to practice a theory of change by writing it for your organization and or drawing it. Let's take a look at what we might do if we were writing it. So we're going to have 3 nice basic steps. Step 1. This is where I'm going to want you to write something down on your piece of paper or type into it. I'm going to ask for volunteers to share in the chat box, but not quite yet. I'm going to let you build it first, and then I'll ask for you to share. So your first step is to think about the results. Now, if your organization, you might have multiple programs, but remember, we're at the 30,000-foot overview, really, really high level. So each program is a strategy. So it's okay that you have multiple programs. That means you have multiple strategies to get to your results. I want you to think not about your strategies right now, not about your programs. I want you to think about your result or your results, plural. In my example, it is to improve the health of participants. If you could please write down or type into your document, what is the result, singular or results, plural, that you want to achieve as an organization? That's going to help us build our theory of change. Once you've written down your results, or your result, singular, either one, we'll move on to step 2. Now I want you to write down your strategy, singular, or strategies, plural. So it could be that there's going to be a program that's focused on exercise. In my example, there's also a program that's going to be focused on nutrition. And there's going to be a program that's focused on stress reduction. So in my example, I have 3 strategies to get to my result of improving the health of participants. Go ahead and jot down. You don't need a lot of detail right now. It can be as simple as just a word or phrase like I have on the screen now. We can build out some detail later. What is the strategy or strategies plural for your organization? We then move on to our final step. Well, it says step 2, but it means to say step 3. Are there any assumptions that you've made? Now this step, you're right, it takes longer, but it's helpful for you to document, maybe not right now, maybe as optional homework. What is the data that your organization has behind your why? Why are you proposing these things? Why do you think these will work in your community? So in my example of improving the health of participants, I would say some of my assumptions, and I would make sure I had cited data about why. Well, increased exercise is known to contribute to improved health. And maybe I have a study or 2 that I've gathered to make that point. And yeah, improved nutrition is known to contribute to improved health as well. Again, having a few resources that are citable that help to prove this point that I might reference in an application. And lastly, the assumption that stress may be a contributing factor to poor health. And some data and some citable information showing that, yeah, high cortisol levels, not good for overall health. So that last step, as I mentioned, probably some optional homework. But if you have step 1, your result or results, and step 2, your strategy or strategies, we could start to write our theory of change. So we would first identify what the strategy is that's important. And then we could add the phrase, so that, and we could carry on. We might have many so that's. What we're trying to find is what is the sentence, the statement that takes our strategy or our strategies and connects them to our result. So here is a basic theory of change text version. We teach people how to improve their nutrition when dining out so that they improve their health. So I have my strategy, so that, and then my result. You might remember from just a moment ago, my example, I have some other strategies I could consider. So the multi-strategy version is on the screen. We teach people how to exercise without going to a gym, improve their nutrition when dining out, and manage their stress levels. 3 strategies, all before my first so that participants improve their health, so that they experience fewer secondary health-related concerns, so that they spend less of their time and money seeking medical care. Multiple strategies, multiple results in this example. You might say, Diane, I don't have multiple results. That's fine. You would stop after your first so that. You could have all 3 strategies still there and say, so that participants improve their health. Period. End of sentence. That's your theory of change. There are some organizations that build big documents, like almost like a strategic plan related to theory of change, because they include all of their research and analysis and assumptions in the big theory of change document. And that's great. Not judging it. I love it if that's what I get. But this on the screen, this is enough. Now let me show you the visual representation. On the left, we have our 3 rectangles. We will do these things. Teach people how to exercise without going to the gym, improve nutrition when dining out, and manage their stress levels so that we get those results, or singular result in this case, of improved health. Whether you like to draw the boxes or put the words and draw the arrows to a single result or to multiple results, either way works. We can do the text version or the drawing version. Now, I do think actually the drawing version would be very difficult to show us in the chat right now. But what I would love to do, I'd like to invite folks to share. When you just wrote out your theory of change, what did it sound like? If you'd be willing to type into the chat box, I would love to see. So what, I shouldn't use the word so what because I just said all the so that's. I'd love to see your strategy, so that result statement. I know it might take a moment to type into the chat box, but if you could please, I'd love to see a few examples of what you've put together. Again, it could be one strategy to one result. It could be one strategy to multiple results. It could be multiple strategies to one result. All are great answers. We're not going to pull it apart, ask you lots of questions. No, I just want to get a sense of what your 30,000-foot overview looks like. We actually have the opportunity to use this statement in our grant applications. Not necessarily because grant makers will say, please tell us your theory of change. We occasionally see that question. It's not the language that is usually put forward by a grant maker. They don't ask you to upload a theory of change, but rather they might say, tell us about the impact you hope to create. And so if that was the case, well, let's see, maybe we have a sense of what Jessica's answer would be. Thanks for sharing, I appreciate it. Let's see, the result is to have a thriving system of food sovereignty for Pawnee Nation that betters daily life for every tribal member and protects our resources for future generations. Okay, so I have a really strong sense of your result. What is your get? I'm curious, Jessica, to know what are the strategies that you do to get to the thriving food system? What are the things that you're doing to help get to that spot? Because I would be left with some assumptions. Not going to be very detailed, but really high level, 1 or 2 things that you might do. If you want to share that as well, I'd love to hear. I love where you're going with your theory of change. Very, very important. Thank you for sharing. Your 30,000-foot view is to help position the reviewer in their understanding. Help me to think about, what am I going to learn? Where are we going here? Susan, thanks for sharing as well. Let's see. So strategy, acquire, build, rehab homes so that the basic need of housing is provided, so that home ownership provides security and stability. Homes must be livable for health and safety. Excellent. So we had multiple do's, so multiple strategies. And then we had some gets. We had multiple so that's. So there were a few different results that were articulated there. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. If anyone else wants to continue to share, I would love to take a look, but we will take a look now. We're going to start to climb down from the 30,000-foot view, and we're going to come into our second type of logic model here in a moment. Because at this 30,000-foot overview, the theory of change, the highest level, that's giving, again, the positioning for what am I expecting to hear about, to learn about, to read about for the grant maker. And this image, the other cited piece from my favorite book here, the Logic Model Guidebook, This is what made me start to talk about like the 30,000 foot versus the 10,000, because to me, these look like very tall mountains. And so the idea that we're way up there in the clouds with our theory of change, our do and our get, our strategies and our results. And as we start to climb down the mountain, we're not on the ground yet. We're not on the day-to-day operations, but somewhere about 10,000 feet, we get to our program logic model. And our strategies, the things we're doing, we're going to start to break those down into the resources we need to do the work, the activities that we will conduct in order to create change, and the outputs that we will be able to count as a result. Our results at that 30,000 foot level, they start to break down into the types of outcomes that we can expect, whether they be short-term, intermediate, or long-term. And it also breaks down into what is the big, broad statement of impact that we intend to create. Right? We heard the results from Jessica and Susan so far. We heard the strategy of the acquire, building, and rehab homes. Jessica's now shared, thank you so much for all that extra typing, some strategies related to the thriving system of food. And so strategy, increased federal dollars. Oh, yes, absolutely. That would be a strategy that could help then result in create the get of that thriving system of food. Wonderful. So as we think about how we're going to bring this work together, we want to be ready so we can answer these questions in our grant applications. When we think about our strategies, our do and our get, which one are we going to build first? Now, the way that I do it in this particular class, we do theory of change first, our high-level strategies, and our logic model then, our 10,000 foot overview. There is a bit of debate in my sector. So I was able to say the high-level strategy in my example was we were going to focus on improving health. And we did that through 3 different strategies. And in a minute, we're going to start to build our logic model, and I'll show you what that looks like as I carry my example through. I came from my 30,000 foot overview. I could start to flush out things at the 10,000 foot overview. But the debate that happens in my sector, folks who love logic models, is a bit of a chicken or egg conundrum. Which one comes first? The reality, either one could happen first, and you could end up with an amazing program that's going to get funded. So how do we decide? It really is about the folks in the room. Who are the decision makers? It could be sometimes that there's an individual who wants to start a nonprofit organization. And so what they have is this excellent idea for a tactical program that they want to implement. And it's, I mean, tactical, like this is how we're going to do it. And then they work their way back up to be able to articulate their theory of change in a very concise way, the way we've just built it. And other times folks say, you know, I really want to, I think if we do these like big picture things, I think we could impact, fill in the blank, food security, housing, environmental concerns. But we could start at that high level and then say, so how are we going to do this? Let's brainstorm and start to come down to something that is more tactical. Both can work. There is no perfect one way to approach logic models and theories of change. Having both, whether you started with logic model and went to theory of change, or whether you started with theory of change and went to logic model, having both is your ideal for an application to ensure that you are writing in the way that is truest to your organization's strategic mission and vision. As we're thinking about our program logic model, we're at the 10,000 foot overview. So we're on that mountain. And so we're thinking about like, there's some roads now. We're not way up in the clouds. So I like this idea that we're going to follow a flow. We're going to follow the path, whether we're going left to right in the way we're going to build it, or top to bottom or bottom to top, doesn't matter. But we're going to flow or follow a journey, follow the road, starting always with resources and working our way towards impact on this journey together. What we're going to do is ultimately complete something that looks like this. This is one of the most basic logic model templates that our team could agree on would help translate into just about anything. And you're going to see some kind of interesting, we'll say, logic model structures from different grant makers a little bit later on before we close. What we're about to build, this is going to take a little bit of time. This is kind of workshoppy. What I, again, would like for you to have is a piece of paper that you can write onto or something that you can type into. And as we go through the logic model, I will be asking for folks to share your answers in the chat box. Do you have to answer all of the 7 prompts in the chat box? Not if you don't want to. If you're not sure what your answer is for that one, there's zero pressure. If you feel like you've got an answer for at least one, yes, please do. Share in the chat box. I want to see all the different examples that we can come up with as we build our logic model. And you could then use the course material, the logic model guide that Brooke had placed the link to in the chat that's in your learning center. You'll be able to use that to build for both the current program you're thinking of and maybe additional in your organization later on. When we think, oh, there's that link again. Yes, Brooke, thank you so much. All right. So as we're thinking about our logic model, we are going to move from left to right. And we're going to start with resources. I've used the analogy when you saw that image and it looked like there was a road working its way through. I used the analogy that we could be on a road, we could be on a journey as we're thinking about the continuation, the flow of information. We need to know one before we get to the next stop on our journey. You might also consider it a conveyor belt. The idea, I've visualized this before, so I'll share the second analogy to see if this helps. If you pretend that you have just walked up to an incredibly long conveyor belt or a very long, maybe assembly line, and you place a very large cardboard box onto this conveyor belt. The cardboard box is not moving yet. The assembly line, the conveyor belt is stopped. You put the box onto the conveyor belt, and in it are going to be your resources. The things that you will need in order to conduct the program, in order to complete the project. So we're going to put all sorts of people and resources and supplies and equipment. We're going to put it in the box. And then we're going to push the green go button on this conveyor belt or on this assembly line. The box is going to start to move to the right. And actually where it's headed for, it's a big metal structure that the conveyor belt runs through. And when the box with all those resources is in this big metal structure, the magic is happening. The sparks are flying. The work is happening. And it might be just for a few minutes. It might be for days or weeks if we think about our conveyor belts. But the activities, the cool stuff you do is happening. And at the other end of that metal structure, the conveyor belt continues. You're standing there, and you could count your outputs. How many children participated? How many meals were delivered? How many homes were built? You can count things. You can count people. You can count meals. You can count animals. As a result, You also could say, what were my outcomes? Changes in behavior, knowledge, skill as a result of the activities that just took place. The conveyor belt continues a little bit further down, and maybe 6 months pass. Maybe it's 3 months that pass. But you can check in and find out, were there any changes in behavior, knowledge, skill as a result of those activities that took place in that big metal structure when everything was in your cardboard box? Your conveyor belt, it's continuing even further. Now it might be 9 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. It's a really long conveyor belt. And you are again thinking about changes in behavior, knowledge, or skill. Now the conveyor belt might end, or it might continue, sort of like Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story, to infinity and beyond. It goes on. And at some point you might say, oh, we did it. We reached our impact. We reached our thriving food system. We did it. We've got housing stability. We did it. You might get to that point. You might not be sure where on the timeline you're going to get to that point, but that's the impact that you are striving for. So we're going to build our logic model together. Are you ready? Everybody ready? You give me one of the little reactions there. Okay, we're going to begin with resources. So if you could please, if you're doing this on a piece of paper or in a notebook, I would please ask you to write the heading resources. If you're typing, please type the heading resources. Some grant makers will refer to this as inputs. They're synonyms, they mean the same thing. These are the things and the people that you need to accomplish your soon-to-be stated activities. It can be human, resources, people, volunteers, participants, board members, volunteers. It can be financial. Yeah, you need money to make it happen. So that's a pretty good resource that we should have. Maybe it's some donated space, donated goods. Probably need maybe some community partners. Let's make sure we've got a few of those in our resources. Maybe some formal partnerships, some memorandums of understanding. We might need some organizational resources, some supplies, some consumable office supplies, some programmatic art supplies. Might need some system resources, computers, commercial kitchen equipment, big construction equipment if we're building homes. Your resources are your own. So jot down as many as you can think of, whether they cost you cash or they are in kind. They are donated to you, therefore they don't cost you any cash. All of your resources should be listed right now. This might take a moment. When you're in your 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper logic model, when you're all done, when you finished it, you might have shortened the list a little bit. For right now, though, we are in brainstorming mode. I want you to list as many resources as you can think of, please. I have a short version on the screen for you as an example. If we continue with my example about improving health, right? We had nutrition and exercise and stress reduction as our 3 strategies to get to that result of the improved health. Our resources that we might list in that example. We need to have money. We need to have a fitness facility so that we can have those exercise classes. We need to have staff who are going to teach people how to use the equipment and maybe teach some classes. We would need to have some fitness equipment so that they would be able to use that and then consider, well, what does it look like if I do this at home? What kind of weights will I have practiced with? Or what sort of different bands for stretching will I have played with that I would want to then have in my home environment? So that's only a short list because I had 3 different strategies, and these are all related to just one strategy. As you are finishing your brainstormed list of resources, paid for them or got them donated, if anyone could type at least one of your resources into the chat box. No pressure to type all of them, but if you could type at least one for me in the chat box, I would love to see some of your examples. All right, Jessica has a land base. Cultural knowledge. I love that that's there. That's not something that we can see, but that is something that is of significant value that without, it wouldn't go well. Love it. The staff itself, partnerships. Susan needs to have some architects and engineers. Yes, if we're building some homes or also remodeling and rehabbing, good idea. Makes total sense. Yep. Technical knowledge. Lisa's got funding. Need that money. The housing market itself. Interesting. Good. All right, so we've got a wide range of our resources or our inputs that are represented in the chat box. As you're finishing your list, if you want to continue to share some of your examples, that would be fantastic. So that is the first element of our logic model. Now, I do want to warn you, something common that happens when we're building logic models. We're going to continue on our journey, and you're going to go, oh, I forgot. Fill in the blank. No worries. Go back. Go back to your list, what you typed or what you were writing, and jot down extra ideas. That's really common when people are building logic models, that as the conversations continue, they realize, oh, I didn't consider that. Oh, that's a great point, colleague of mine. It's why we like to have many people from an organization at the table, virtual or physical, when we're building a logic model, because different perspectives are going to help give us different elements of our logic model. Okay, now I'm going to also, I should start to put headings in the chat box for you so you know what you are responding to. So the first one was our resources or our inputs. That means we're going to move on to activities. And when we think about activities, what are they? The specific actions that make up the program. Perhaps you might want to call them interventions. It could be a process that you're putting in place. It could be an event, a class, a series of classes, some sort of performance, some sort of collaborative meeting series. It's up to you. If you could start to jot down on your piece of paper or in the document you're typing in, what are the activities that you are going to implement once you have all of your funding? You've got those resources all paid for. Now what? By the time you're done, this will be not a super detailed task list. It will be probably a grouping of tasks. But as you're brainstorming now, if that's the level you're at, if you're thinking tasky level, that's fine. You can group them into higher level key activities later. Whichever feels better for you. Higher level, like I don't have the detail of the exercise classes. I don't know the frequency with which they're going to happen. I don't know if like nutrition classes, are we going to split it so that one's like gluten-free cooking and one's like low sodium cooking? I haven't gotten there yet. I just know we're going to have nutrition classes. But maybe you're like, no, what I know is that I want to have a cooking class that's focused on gluten-free cooking and I want to have it once a week. You start where you're comfortable. Either is fine. Where you will end for your logic model is at that 10,000 foot view. We need to have them summarized. We need to have them at a consolidated list. But for now, you start either way. So on the screen, I have my examples. So for our example of that improved health, following through with our logic model from the resources I first shared, we know our activities will be, we're going to offer some exercise classes. We are going to offer some nutrition classes. We're going to have some stress reduction activities. Yet to be determined. I haven't figured it all out yet. Take a moment. Write it down. Brainstorming. Spelling doesn't count. Acronyms are fine. Or type it right into your document. And when you're ready, under my heading in the chat, please, if you could share at least one of your activities that you have placed in your logic model. What you are brainstorming here is actually the answer to the question that is so common in grant applications. Please describe the activities you will undertake with this grant funding. Your answer should come straight from this column. Depending on the number of characters that you have, or the word length that you have, or the page limit that you have, you might get to add some real detail to it. Or maybe you only get to have 3 sentences and you say, in order to achieve this program, we are going to offer exercise classes and nutrition classes and stress reduction workshops. Depends on the grant maker's format for how much space you have, but your answer to that narrative question should come from this blueprint. All right, I see some activities are coming into the chat. Let's see what we've got. Community input, land renovation, tribal member education, federal programmatic funding. Okay, so I love that list, Jessica, and I'm wondering, because funding is resources, but also the act of securing more funding is an activity. So I can see how that could be in both places. So overall process, operational process can have a place in activities as well. Fantastic. Okay, let's see. So Susan shared the building a waiting list for the different types of homes needed. Yeah. As we continue on, if any of you want to share your activities, by all means, would love to see it. Now, for those of you that were starting and you said, what I really know is like the on the ground, day-to-day task level. Again, absolutely fine. And if that's how you're brainstorming, and then you consolidate into like maybe many tasks into one activity to put in your logic model, don't get rid of your task list. That task list belongs in your work plan. You're going to want to keep that. That'll help you with some of the other application attachments or your implementation timeline a little bit later on. So don't let those go anywhere. They are still incredibly valuable, but for purposes of your logic model, you might consolidate, you might smush a few together in order to come up with what's going to fit into your 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. A bid for construction related to our houses. Yes, another great example of our activities. Thank you so much for everybody that's sharing. So we're going to continue. We started with resources, then we put in our activities. Now we get to think about our outputs. All right, let's put outputs here in our chat. And we will be thinking about the things we produced, created, completed, things that we can quantify is the best way to think about your outputs. I almost verbally just gave some examples for people on the line based on what you shared. No, but it's your job to think about what you're going to count. What are the things that you might be able to count and report to a grant maker? It's a nice way to think about it. You get the money, you do the things. When you go to report to the grant maker, what are some of the metrics you will use? What are quantifiable things you will say, dear grant maker, thank you so much for that award. We've been doing great work, and as a result, we have done what? In my example, it would be that we have worked with, I might not know the number yet. I could put it to maybe hash sign here, right? 2 numeral signs so that I remember I want to put a number. But I know that what we're going to count are the number of participants. And I know what we're going to count are the number of classes. Oh, but I can sense your question. Diane, you had multiple types of classes. Yes, I did. Should we have like just smush it all number of classes? You could, but I also could say number of nutrition classes, and I could in my outputs also say the number of exercise classes, and I could also say the number of stress reduction workshops. Yes, that is actually, you're right, that is so much clearer. So go ahead. Write down on your piece of paper or in your notebook or type into your document, what are the things that you are going to count, the people that you are going to count, the outputs, what will they be? What would you anticipate reporting to a grant maker? And when you're ready, you guessed it, if you would please share an example of what you have typed into the chat box. What is it that you will count? This is one measure of success. It is not, it is far from the only measure of success that grant makers are thinking about, but it is common. They're thinking about, if I grant you $50,000, $5 million, whatever the number might be, what do I get? What do I get to hear about? What do I get to see as a result? Well, I'd be able to tell you that we did 50 classes. And they might say, oh, 50 classes and how many people? Oh, 5,000 people and wow. I'm making up numbers, but they might say, wait, $50,000 and 5 people for after all those nutrition classes? Where would 5 as an output make sense? If we're talking about rehab and building houses like Susan was, yeah, 5 might make sense. So it's not about how big your number for outputs is. It has to be right sized for the type of work you're doing and also the dollar amount that you're requesting. So outputs, number of members, families housed. Lisa, perfect, love it. Jessica's given us a number of outputs to consider. The number of individuals consulted, the number of individuals trained, the number of trainings and the types of training, the number of acres renovated, the number of new agricultural operations, the amount of dollars paid to tribal members. Jessica, are you sure you don't have a logic model already open? That's fantastic. That's a great list of outputs for like a 2-minute prompt. Well done. So you've got really good examples in the chat box here. Oh, Jaslyn, I like it. The amount of money saved. We can count money. I'm intrigued to know more. Because also, I think that might play in when we talk about outcomes here. All right, Jaslyn, I'm watching to see what else we're going to see for your examples here in your logic model. I like where you're headed. All right, so if we know our resources, if we know our activities, if we've thought about what we will count, time to talk about outcomes. Now, the prompts for outcomes. Spoiler alert, short term, intermediate, and long term. Yes, the slides and the text on the slides, well, like the body of the text, going to look the same. What's different? The timing at the top. Short term, intermediate, long term. I am not going to give you the definitions for time when it comes to short term, intermediate, and long term. It might depend on your grant maker for what that answer is. They might tell you the period of time you should consider. What the grant maker says is what we want to rely on first. But if we're thinking about you and your work and putting that front and center first, I would love for you to think about what is ideal for your program design. You might say, for the work that we're doing, I'm going to pick on Susan's houses because that one, having helped to build my own house, I'm like, that's a long timeline. Like, we weren't done for 5 years. That's its own story, different day. But I'm like, yeah, it was a really long timeline. It wouldn't make sense to talk about only 12 months. Long timeline. You might say, though, actually, our work, we're going to do short-term outcomes. We're going to make it the first 2 months, and then we're going to do months 3, 4, 5. We'll go to 7, 8, 9, and then we're going to talk about 10 months and beyond. It's up to you. Each program has a different cadence for where it might be natural that you could connect again with participants or where you feel like you might be able to measure for outcomes. So I do encourage you to talk with your colleagues about the examples that you're looking at here and how your timelines might be unique to you. But that being said, when we talk about a short-term outcome, something from the moment that you counted an output for a little while. True story, we do a hands-on exercise in a class where we teach logic models by doing chocolate chip cookie baking. I know, I'm sorry, I should have warned you I was going to talk about cookies. We don't have snacks today. But the idea of a chocolate chip cookie baking exercise, if you can think about the smell of the chocolate chip cookies and what that would be like, the immediate output would be how many cookies are there? When we talk about short-term outcomes, we're talking like hours. We're talking days. Not even, are there any cookies left? They're gone. A really, 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 really short-term outcome. I give that as an example. It's like the opposite of the house building one where it's like, it could be really long. It could be really, really, really short. And neither's right and neither's wrong. It has to be unique to the work. So think about your specific work and your short-term outcome. And here's what I'm going to put in the chat box. What I would love to hear is actually two things as your option. One, you could tell me what the period of time is that you're thinking about. Is it the next 3 months? Is it the first 2 months? Is it the first 2 weeks? What is it that you think you want to define as short-term outcomes? That would be one prompt you could respond in the chat box with. The second is, what do you think is going to be your outcome you want to measure? It's okay if you don't know the number or the percentage that you want to go for, but are you thinking about a change in knowledge? Like in my example, an increase in knowledge about nutrition. Or, let's see, Lisa has shared healthier members. So what I love to ask myself, because I would ask it about what I see on my screen too, as indicated by what? So for my short-term outcome, increase in knowledge about nutrition, as indicated by pre and post test survey results? Or is it as indicated by self-reported knowledge gain from participants? That's a great extra way to build out your short-term outcomes to ensure that you know how are you going to measure it, and is that method of measurement actually feasible for your organization and your team? I love it. Lisa, ours are super similar. So that worked out really well to think about. I love asking that, as indicated by what? And that's true in short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. Let's see. So how many families, Jaslyn says, were housed within a couple of months? So there's a few things that we can consider here, Jaslyn. The number of families that are housed all together could be an output that we would want to consider. Now, in terms of how families are housed, changes in knowledge, behavior, skill. All I know is what I've seen in the chat box, right? So I definitely don't know about the program design for what is it that helps the family to get housed. Is there an increase in financial education, so increase in financial literacy knowledge so that they can maintain and sustain their new home? That might be something that would be measured a few months after. Just thinking about some of the other ways you might build that out, because the number of families is definitely an output and could be continuously built upon in terms of short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes for what continues to happen to those families who have been housed. Like where you're headed, that's really great. Let's see, Jessica says in 6 months, thank you. Okay, so we have, like I said, different short-term outcome timelines. Increased engagement with tribal members, as indicated by what? I love it. Good. We could think about that. Written long-term strategic plan to share with leadership. That's something that we can see. That also could be something that would be like so important we would consider it an output. It's something that we could see, we could touch, it's quantifiable. One program designed and grant proposal submitted. I could see how those also might play into inputs, and perhaps, maybe not in short term because of grant funding, right? Slow money. It could be an increase in funding could come up in intermediate and long-term. Just looking ahead, thinking where that might go. I like what I'm seeing. So engagement could also be part of it there. Jessica's added. Okay. So we're starting to build. Now, what does it look like for intermediate and long-term? You tell me. Same basic idea. We're dealing with changes in awareness, knowledge, skill, behavior. What I'd love to hear as you're thinking about intermediate, let's put intermediate outcomes. Hold on, I can't type and talk at the same time. Intermediate outcomes. What might be next? The conveyor belt is continuing to move. The clock is continuing to move forward. So what might happen in months 4 through 9 or months 8 through 12? What is it that's happening after things have been going on for a while? In my example, where we had our nutrition classes, our exercise classes, those stress reduction workshops, could be that now there is an increased skill for participants in terms of those exercise activities. As indicated by what? I heard you asking me because I taught you that question, and I might say, oh, thanks for asking. Let's see, is it going to be based on the instructor or is it going to be based on their self-reported skill? Nope, it's going to be based on the exercise class leader's assessment. And then you're like, wait, are you sure that they can do that? Yeah, they've got the capacity for it. That's my answer. And then increase in adherence. Tell me more. Increase in adherence for what? To choosing different options when they're dining out, to ask some more questions so that we know more, because increase in adherence, it sounds cool, but would a grant maker know from looking at enough to understand what that means? And how would we measure that increase in adherence? So when we're brainstorming, right, we're putting anything and everything we can come up with so that then we with our colleagues can sit down and ask questions. How would we measure that? Are we sure we can measure that? Will we have access to these folks? The way that this is being played out on my screen with my example for the health example is that we will continue to have interaction with these folks, that this wasn't like a one and done program that ran for a month. Sounds like I'm going to continue to have these folks in a program. It might be a longer implementation, and I'm not necessarily going to be trying to like knock on doors, send emails, make phone calls to follow this up later. So you want to consider that as well. Let's see, what do we have for some intermediate outcomes that might be coming into our chat box? Please feel free to share actually the outcomes themselves or what you're thinking for your time period. All right. Excitement and knowledge increase for tribal members. Fantastic. Now, I'm just pretending with some of these questions here in this moment, Jessica. I might say, oh, that's great. Based on, what's the baseline now? Like, how excited are folks now? Or how knowledgeable are folks now? So what's your baseline? And how much do you think it's going to increase? I was just reading a proposal yesterday, actually, on behalf of a grant maker. I was doing some review for them, and there was an outcome section that had, it was written such that it said increase, whatever they were trying to focus on, by 10 from, no, it said to 20%, or increase by 10 to 50%. So it was really, I thought it was a really clever way in a very character counted space to tell me that where they're headed was to 50%, and they were increasing by 10, so that meant they were at 40 right now, or increase by 5 to 20. I know that they're headed for 20, and they started at 15. So I think if you can contemplate sharing your baseline and your ultimate outcome within your logic model, if that fits for space, or at least what you keep track of in your notes, I think that's really helpful for what you're going to write and also how you could build out your logic model. Okay, and let's see. Some retaining of leases for agriculture. Great examples of outcomes. Great. Okay, so time continues to pass. both in class and in our logic model example with the program. So we make it further on in our conveyor belt idea. We are further to the right in our logic model example, and now we're talking about long-term outcomes. Many times this is more than 12 months from when the grant was first awarded. So same basic text, changes in awareness, skill, knowledge, and behavior. But we're further out. And for many, you do not have access to folks any longer. And if you could have access to them, it might cost more money in order to get to them. You might have to do telephone surveys. You might have to do email follow-up and mail follow-up. And maybe you actually canvass the community and do some in-person meetings to try and reach your program participants. It gets a lot more expensive the further you get from your first implementation for measuring your outcomes. That's a generalized rule. And also a generalized rule is that because it is more than 12 months out, it is often past where grant makers are supporting your work. Yet they ask about long-term outcomes all the time. So it's a bit of a sticky spot. They want you to tell they want you to tell them what are those anticipated long-term outcomes. But they're not necessarily going to pay for them, and they aren't necessarily ever going to ask you to report on them. How does that work? Well, because from the time they fund you until the time you report, if that is a 12-month period of time, these long-term outcomes haven't been reached yet. These are your theory. This is what you expect will happen based on your practiced wisdom, but it might be outside of what you are expected to report on. And that's okay. You might not have to report on them, but you should be able to if you had the funding resources to do so. So in my health example, I might not have grant funding to be measuring things past 12 months, but based on our practiced wisdom and based on our assumptions and our theory of change, I believe that we will be able to see if we could measure it, if we could get to those participants. I believe that they would report an increase in their overall strength. And I believe that they would report, and we would be able to check against their initial baseline, that they were more flexible. And I believe based on our practiced wisdom and that they would be able to report on an increase in endurance for cardio activities. Will we be forced to find those participants and ask these questions? Depends on the grant, the length of the grant, and the money they're giving for evaluation. But we feel confident this is going to happen, even if we're not going to go do the measurement. I have a different question for you. You are welcome to type in your long-term outcomes if you would like in the chat box, but I'm also curious how many of you have long-term outcomes in mind that are more than 12 months from where you would start your program or your project. If they're more than 12 months, you could let me know like a Y for yes and then for no. How many of you have those long-term outcomes that are farther down this timeline? Yeah, Jessica, that makes sense for your work. I can see that. So you're predicting what might happen, but you aren't necessarily, unless like maybe we're talking about multi-year federal funding, multi-year state funding, sure, that we might get the chance and have the money to do long-term outcomes. Okay, many of you have things that are longer-term outcomes past the 12 months. If it was foundation funding, like, well, this is what I think is going to happen, but they're not going to ask you to report on it, but they still want you to tell them what you think will happen. And what that brings us to is our very last portion of the logic model, our impact. And when we think about impact, your impact is basically, yep, you've got it, your theory of change, result, your get. So some of you shared with me your theory of change in the chat box. Not all. I would love to hear, what is your impact? What is your get? What is your result or your results? If you think back a little earlier in class, a number of slides ago, there was the image that were the triangles that I said are sort of like mountains to me. And at the top of the mountain on the right-hand side, it said our results. And then when it came down the mountain to the 10,000-foot overview, it had short-term, intermediate, long-term outcomes and impact. It is a direct line for me when I think about building theory of change and logic model. What does your result say in your theory of change? Drop that right into impact. Yes, you can build on it more here, but those two should be the same. They should point to the same thing. Yes, expanded more in a logic model, but those need to align or your grant makers will have questions. Fantastic. All right, we've got impact coming in. So then, because now, high five everybody, you have created a draft logic model. Now you're ready to adapt it to your grant makers. Now you might say, Diane, why pretzels? Well, yes, I do love watching the Great British Baking Show, and I watched how they make pretzels, and I was like, wow, right? They turn the dough into these beautiful things. You're going to turn your logic model draft template into beautiful things for grant makers. I know I like food analogies. So here's what you're going to do. I've given you a basic template to consider, super basic, that you and your colleagues can use to draft one, ask each other questions, make it as strong as possible. It stays on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Please don't make your font teeny tiny 0.5, too small. Keep your font at least 10. Please be nice. These are real glasses. I like 11-point font if you can. You don't need lots of 1-inch margins around those. So you can push your margins. That's fine. So you're going to develop your programmatic logic model. If you have multiple programs, you might choose to do one for each. And that way, when you're applying for a grant, you can use the logic model to answer narrative questions, but you're going to take your logic model template, you're going to build it, then you're going to translate it into the grant maker forms. See, here's why I then call it a pretzel. This one from HHS, this looks kind of like the one we just built. It's consolidated some of the outcome columns. It doesn't have an impact column at the end. At the beginning, it has something extra and unique. The situation. Tell us about what's happening right now in the community. So basically, it wants to know about the need right now. What are we addressing? So you've got, wow, like 90% of what you need already set. Now this is pretzel-like. This does not look like what we built from. This is HUD. But what it does have is actually a lot of the same information. It just looks really different. It has services and activities. Hey, cool. We had that in our template. And it has measures, pre, post, year to date. Oh, we have those too. Outputs. Yep, we've got them. Outcomes with a subheading of impact. We have those too. We had our short, our intermediate, and our long term. Yes, you're doing great. So you got to use all, it just looks really different. Evaluation tools for measurement. Okay, so we did not have it as a specific heading in our logic model, but because you asked each other as indicated by what, when you were putting your outcomes together, you know what tools you're going to use. You already talked about it. Now you just have to write it in a slightly different structure. Now you might, I'll be honest, you might sometimes get to a spot where the grant maker says, we would like your logic model and the structure is not important. You do you. You literally could take the basic template we gave you and use that. You could design one. There's some really cool template things out there. This is fancy. It's from a funded grant. I love it, but I'm like, you don't have to go all bells and whistles. The super basic is okay. What I'm most concerned about is that you are putting the information in a way that avoids grantmaker review questions. So what might happen if grantmakers are asking, whether they call it that or not, about your theory of change? Maybe they're saying, what results do you expect to happen? Tell us about your overall strategy for your work. Those are theory of change questions. So they may, after they read your entire application, ask questions about how are you sharing your results? How are you sure this is feasible? How are you sure you can achieve this? Have you tried this before? Is this based on something evidence-based? Is this based on a pilot? What's your practiced wisdom that makes you think these strategies will work? Did you learn from others, other collaborative partners? Where did this model come from? These are the types of questions that when grant makers, whether they ask about theory of change formally or not, those are the type of questions that they may ask themselves and other reviewers when they're reading your work. So having a theory of change pre-agreed upon by your organization gives you the chance to build that as kind of an overall message in your application regardless of structure. It becomes kind of like your red thread throughout the entire application. Your program logic model, there are some questions that might come up from your grant reviewers when they read either your logic model document itself, if it's a visual attachment, or if they're reading the narrative version of those questions. So you might be talking about your outcomes, and they might wonder, how are you going to learn from those? Are you going to share those with your colleagues? These activities, have they happened before somewhere else? Who are you really trying to serve? Are we talking like students K-12? Are we talking 7th and 8th graders, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? So if you're able to put in some specifics, maybe from your SMART objectives into your logic model, that can help to connect the dots for your reviewers. Oh, here I just talked about SMART, and there you go. There is the acronym for SMART related to objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So the grant makers, in looking at your logic model, might ask, is the logic model itself SMART? Does it feel like this is attainable with the timeline you have and the dollars available? Does this feel relevant to the goal that you have stated for the program? Do we have enough specifics that we can visualize from this logic model what this would look like? That is actually one of my favorite things to use as my last question. We've built a logic model. Do I have enough information here? There's certainly a lot of white space on this version, and so I'm like, there's more. Could I put more here? Could I add more detail? I want to be able to visualize it. I want my board president to be able to visualize it. I want the grant maker themselves to be able to visualize, what does this look like when we implement it? This one, it's okay if you have white space, but there is more room. So is there anything someone with fresh eyes would want to know in order to be able to visualize what this looks like? I could talk about logic models all day. All day, I know. But we only had 90 minutes together to talk about logic models today. And you've been fantastic at sharing as you were building your own. I'm wondering, you haven't asked any questions throughout. Did anybody have any in a parking lot for me? Do you have any final questions about logic models you want to have addressed before we hang up today? Go ahead, type them right into the chat box right now. I'm here, happy to answer. If, on the other hand, what might be the case is you're like, I don't think I'm going to have a question until I go to do this with the team later, or until I do it in my application the next time. No worries. You can email me at any time. Just maybe a quick little context reminder that you were in the Native Learning Center session on logic models, just to orient me to where the question came from. But you can email me at Diane@DHLeonardConsulting at any time. I'm as excited to talk about logic models over email as I am in person, so it'll be a good time. But please do Let me know if you have questions about logic models when you're trying them. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat for questions, but I also wanted to highlight that I'm happy to answer questions on any platform where you find us, whether it's LinkedIn or like our team will answer on Facebook, wherever you are comfortable asking questions, wherever feels easiest is totally where we're happy and we'll always answer. All right. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, and if I see any, I'll type back. But Brooke, I think we're, question, does the book I cover share both types of logic models? Yes, yes, it does. And what I'm going to type in here is the name of the book. The name is in the bottom of the slides in a few spots, but I'm going to type in the authors too so that you can find it. Not sure where it's best to find it right now, but please do support independent bookstores whenever possible. But I think once I type this in, I think we'll be good on questions for now. And you know how to find me. So thank you.
Thank you so much for another incredible presentation, Diane. I'm going to hang back for a second. Feel free to enter any questions you folks have into the chat. I do encourage you to please complete today's webinar feedback survey. I am about to put that link into the chat as well. Just takes a minute or two, helps us know what's working well, what we can improve upon, and they are anonymous, so feel free to be as candid as you would like. We encourage you to attend our next webinar. That is not going to actually be until December. We're kind of taking a break because we have a week-long training happening here in a couple weeks, and we're breaking for Thanksgiving as well. But our next one coming up is December 3rd. That's on Saving Money for Kids by Shante Moore. You can access this as well as our other recorded webinars. It's moved to YouTube. So that is the location of our new webinar archive. I'm going to go ahead and put that link into the chat as well. And that's also for you in the shared notes. Here we go. And we hope you can check out our other upcoming events. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We have our in-house produced podcast, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Simplecast. And then if you prefer to watch the videos with our guests, you can see that on our YouTube channel as well. All right, I'm going to hang back another second just in case anybody is wanting to ask any final questions for Diane. But otherwise, we hope that everybody has enjoyed the webinar and that you have a fantastic rest of your day. And again, our next webinar is going to be next month in December. But we wish everybody a wonderful kickoff to the holiday season. Looks like somebody is typing, so I'm going to hang back so they can ask their question in the chat. Oh, it's some love for you in the chat, Diane. Thanking you for your information. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and close out. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you again, Diane, for another incredible presentation. We will talk to you soon. All right, folks, take care.